I'm going to crack on now to the next slide, please, Ebony, which is just a little bit about the Wales Co-op Centre. So the Wales Co-op Centre was set up in 1982 by the TUC, and that was in order to combat mass redundancies. And the TUC believed, and still believes, that co-ops and employee-owned businesses could play a vital role in the work of as people were becoming unemployed. And for those of you maybe of a certain age like myself who will remember back at that time the Tower Colliery, where the miners were going to lose their jobs because the coal board were going to, or the government at the time was shutting down the mines. So the Tower Colliery was the first client of the Wales Cooperative Centre in relation to employee ownership. And we supported them to save 239 jobs which were at risk, and all those employees pooled £8,000 of their redundancy to purchase the mine, and it reopened in 1995, providing 13 extra years of employment. So this is a big example really of where employee ownership has safeguarded local jobs within a local community really. Next slide, please, Ebony. So this is the current day. We have evolved quite a lot. We deliver lots of projects on behalf of the Welsh Government, but we also deliver commercial services as well. The employee-owned programme that we run is run within Social Business Wales, which is Welsh Government and European Union funded programme. So I'm now going to introduce you to the team. Next slide, please, Ebony. So this is the team within the Employee Ownership Wales programme. So we have Nicola, the project manager. She's not actually with us today, but I think she's in the audience somewhere. So hopefully just having a look from the other side as per for a change. So then we have Paul Cantrill, Branwen Ellis and myself, and we deliver the programme. So our role as part of the delivery is to promote employee ownership and succession, and we provide very specialist advice and services, which I have to say are fully funded resources. So if you're in another part of the UK, you would probably have to pay for this support, but luckily in Wales, we can provide this service for free. So we've helped over 50 businesses from a variety of sectors, from TV production, architecture, and we're going to hear obviously from the dentist sector today, and we've based this webinar around the dentistry and employee ownership trusts, but obviously it applies to whatever sector you are in. Next slide, please. After Ebony, the one after my picture, so Wales succession issues. I just want to go into a little bit, I'm not going to dwell on this, but a little bit of background into the succession issues that we find in Wales. So of the businesses in Wales, 99% are SMEs. So that's a large amount of our economy being SME businesses, and Wales is very open really to and being vulnerable to the failure due to lack of succession planning. So research has found that 75% of businesses within Wales close simply as a result of no planning, which is awful if you think about all of those jobs that are lost when that happens. Particularly in Wales, family businesses are an important part of the landscape, but yet there appears to be very little formal planning, and nearly half of the businesses have no succession plan in place at all. And what we find is that only 12% of family run businesses actually reach third generation. And that's because these days, you know, children want to go off and do something of their own. So they're not particularly interested potentially in the family business. So again, you know, what happens then? Also, what we find in the work that we've done, and researchers found, that owners sometimes have an unrealistic price expectations. I mean, there's always a market for a sale, but it depends entirely on finding a buyer who is willing to offer the right price. And sometimes we think that we know owners spend their lives investing in their business, both toil and capital, but sometimes they can have unrealistic expectations when it comes to selling their businesses. We also find that they can be reluctant to discuss selling because they think that potentially it could lead to the business being you know, open to others prying, maybe competitors who are just looking to see what they're doing. So, you know, that's an issue as well. And, you know, owners tend to have a very limited awareness of the different succession options. And I'm just going to run through now very quickly what those options are. But just to kind of finish that page, really, it's to say that succession planning is undertaken in a very reactive fashion rather than succession being business as usual. Next slide, please, Ebony. So, as I mentioned, owners may not have, you know, they might have limited knowledge of what is out there, what way they can sell their business. Normally, they will know the trade, the sale, that, and think that is the only option. But yet, experts interviewed around trade sale found that actually owners found that anything below a £5 million turnover found it hard to find interested buyers, even for successful businesses. So, you know, sometimes even trade sales don't work. Trade sales can be risky. For instance, they may require an owner to open their books to a competitor who just may be on a fishing expedition rather than being genuinely interested in buying the business. So that could lead to destabilizing the business in some way. It may yield a good return to the owner, but it could also be risky and difficult to arrange. So selling to a competitor may also mean the loss of independence for that business, and it could mean that jobs could be lost within that sector. Management buyouts and management buy-ins. This is where the senior people within the business would look to invest their own money, often with funds provided through external means. This route's quite common and sometimes a preferred route for VCs, that's venture capitalists, and also accountancy companies. It's seen as potentially an easier route. However, what you find with a management buyout, management buy-in, is that within 5 years, potentially, it could be looking at that cycle again of selling the business on if there's been, you know, something put on the business that they need to find another buyer within the 5 years. So, you know, that can also cause difficulties. As I mentioned, 75% of businesses close simply because they don't plan. And that, you know, those are the ones that will liquidate voluntary wind-ups, and they're very likely to yield the very lowest of returns because tax charges will be levied on the profits made. We've talked about family succession. but today we're going to be talking about employee buyouts. So I'd like to hand over now to my colleague Branwen, who is going to take us through employee ownership.
Thank you, Sarah. Bore da, everybody. Good morning. Next slide, please, Ebony. Next couple of slides, actually. So, picking up from Sarah's final point on the last slide, we're going to spend the remaining time on the webinar this morning looking at employee ownership in particular. And I suppose generally we consider a business to be employee owned if it is significantly owned by the employees, either directly through individual employees owning shares in the company, or indirectly through the trust model. And it's actually the trust model that we'll be focusing on today. Next slide, please, Ebony. So just to give you a flavour really of some of the employee-owned businesses in Wales, I mean, Sarah's already alluded to the fact that they come from a wide range of sectors. We've got Cwmni Da there, the TV production company based in North Wales. We've got Aber Instruments and Sky Instruments, two mid-Wales-based companies, that are in the sort of manufacturing and scientific sector. We've got Tregroes waffles. For those of you with a sweet tooth like myself, you may have had the pleasure of eating a Tregroes waffles. A moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips, I think is what they say. But they've fully transitioned now into employee ownership. We've got financial management companies, Head and House there in South Wales, as well as training providers, iTech. And then last but not least, we've got the Gateway dental practice, and we're going to be very lucky hearing from George and Mick later on. Next slide, please, Ebony. And here's just a flavour really. I'm sure you're familiar with most of these companies that operate either across the UK or globally, but you may be surprised or not to find that they're employee owned. So we've got Shaun the Sheep, Wallace and Gromit Creators, Admin Animations there in the top left corner. They became employee owned about 3 years ago, along with Riverford Organics below. And I've given the pride of place to my favourite dragon, the John Lewis dragon there from the Christmas advert. I think everybody's virtually aware that John Lewis group is employee owned. And then to the top right hand corner, the less cuddly, more industrious business, the Unipart group, but equally proud of its employee ownership culture. So most of the shares in that business is owned by the employee. And then down at the sort of bottom left-hand corner, we've got Arup there. And I think, it's important to sort of make the point that whilst, any business from across the sectors can become employee owned, size as well, it doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a large business. Arup there has got over 15,000 employees and operate globally. And each employee very proud and very much aware of Sir Arup's key speech that he put together in the 70s on what it means to be employee owned. So next slide, please, Ebony. So hopefully that's given you a flavour of the businesses that are out there that are employee owned. So why is it good for business and the Welsh economy then? Well, I think the key concept that underpins employee ownership is this idea of shared responsibility, risk and reward. And as a consequence of that, employees as co-owners enjoy those greater levels of engagement and are more fulfilled in their roles. I think what we find as well is that they tend to have greater focus on the longer term sustainability and growth, if you like, of the business, as opposed to maybe the shareholders that might buy into a business that are looking for a shorter term return on their investment. So as a result then of that, concept of employees being more engaged and, in it together, so to speak, with running the business, you then sort of find that the advantages can include increased productivity. There was a research piece of work that was done June of last year that looked at the top 50 employee-owned businesses and their productivity compared to the top 50 across the UK of non-employee-owned businesses. And the employee-owned businesses were sort of, the productivity had increased by 6.9% compared to 1% across the non-employee-owned businesses. In terms of greater efficiency and improved margins, you know, what owners and the employees tell us, once they've transitioned into employee ownership or dip their toe in the water, there may be that initial, or let's paint the walls pink or green and let's buy sort of a better coffee machine. But actually what we find over time is that, you know, the teams really get on board, looking at ways that they might, you know, cut costs, and improve those efficiency. We also find people reporting that, you know, that there are greater levels of innovation that take place as well. Last webinar that we ran, we had the pleasure of having a case from Tregroy's Waffles, and he was saying that, you know, as he was ready to leave the business, his, I suppose, risk appetite wasn't the same as the new coming team of owners, if you like. And whereas he might have been inclined to sort of, you know, carry on as usual, the new employee owners were keen to invest in the business and innovate in order to grow it for the future. What we're finding as well, you know, not so much from a succession planning point of view, but we are finding business owners looking at ways that they can, if you like, retain key staff, talented staff, and recruit, you know, that talent as well. Because increasingly we're finding owners saying that it's difficult to find the right people and to keep the right people. So they see transitioning to employee ownership very much as a way of, you know, addressing that specific problem. So I think we've looked there at, you know, the benefits for business. In terms of the Welsh economy, I think it's fair to say that it does, you know, give us better resilience, really, because as well as being a succession plan for owners, it, you know, it enables owners to leave a legacy. It keeps those businesses rooted in their communities as well as the jobs. And you know, I think Sarah's point earlier on, really, in terms of the lack of succession planning in Wales, I think highlights the importance, really, of making sure that these businesses, successful businesses, remain open in the country. Okay, so on that note, I'll hand you over now to my colleague Paul, who will go into greater details of the technicalities of how you might go about setting up an employee ownership trust.
Morning, everyone. I hope you're all well this morning. Ebony, can you move the next slide, please? As has been said, there are a number of ways in which companies can own shares, and the employees in those companies can own shares. I'm going to be talking principally this morning about share companies. And obviously not all dentists are share companies. Some dentists are limited liability partnerships, for example. So what I'm going to be talking about this morning is about employee ownership trusts, which have been, which require that the company that's being sold has shares. We need therefore to think about, if you're not a share company, we need to think about how you could become a share company, and usually this involves some kind of conversion of legal structure. So direct ownership is where individuals in the company own shares, and most companies operate on that basis. So if you were Joanne Bloggs and you worked for a dental company, you could own shares in that company. And you would have a share certificate which says, I, Joanne Bloggs, own the shares in this company, or some of the shares in this company. In indirect ownership, shares are held collectively on behalf of all the employees. And what I'm talking about this morning is the use of indirect ownership using an employee ownership trust. So in that particular case, the share certificate would have the name of the trust on it as the shareholder, not Joanne Bloggs, but Joanne Bloggs will be a beneficiary and have an interest in this in the trust through being an employee of the company. It's also possible for there to be a hybrid of these arrangements. And indeed, for example, in companies, it might be desirable, for example, say in a dental company, you might have senior dentists and you might have a group of nurses and administrators. So some of the senior dentists could own shares directly in the company, direct share ownership, and the remainder of the employees could then own their shareholding through the use of an employee ownership trust. So the hybrid model can work very well in these circumstances. Next slide, please, Emily. Just a bit of a reminder of that. What we're talking about here is where an owner or owners perhaps want to pass on their business, perhaps a dental practice, to the employees who work for them. In this case, obviously, it's critical to have a willing seller and a willing buyer. So having a seller who's really interested in getting a good return for the business, but at the same time, as a genuine interest in the employees, we find that kind of seller is the kind of seller that works really well in these circumstances, the employee ownership. And we need also to have a willing buyer. So that usually is achieved in these circumstances by the employees setting up a small group who then act on behalf of all the employees in discussions about taking the business on from the owner. Valuation is important. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but getting an independent valuation, which we can arrange for you, is particularly important in the circumstances of an employee ownership trust. Vendor expectations, obviously, owners may have expectations other than just the straightforward one of receiving money for their interest in the company. For example, they may wish to remain with the company, they may wish to continue acting as a dental practitioner within the company, for example. So understanding and building in those expectations into this arrangement is a very critical part of getting a very effective transition of ownership to the employees. And also the employee expectations are important. There are certain things that going down this route will deliver to employees. For example, it will deliver a strong say in any future sale of the company, which this in itself provides some security for employees. But at the end of the day, it's still a company, it still has to operate, and the board of the company, as I'll explain, needs to ensure that its interests are put first, because it's only on the success of the company that anything else can actually happen. And the future needs of the business, are you going to expand the business? If you're dealing with primarily national health contracts at the moment and you want to expand into private practice, that may require a different kind of approach to how you structure the ownership and the membership of the board of directors of the company. Next slide, please, Emily. So employee ownership trusts came into being in their current form in 2014. Employee trusts have been around for many years before that, but they were a mixed bag, really, and there wasn't a standard model, which caused confusion. A lot of the original employee trusts were used, for example, for managing share schemes and things like that within the company, rather than owner exit. So it was important. The group of people who work in employee ownership in the United Kingdom through the Employee Ownership Association, which is the kind of umbrella organisation for employee ownership, got together, and as a result of some research work that was done by Graham Nuttall, who is a lawyer, an advisor to the UK government, it was decided that that a new instrument was required called an employee ownership trust, which would simplify some of the aspects of the previous trust legislation and provide a simplified route with some tax benefits to encourage companies to consider this particular model. Since then, we've had over 500 companies within the UK become employee-owned through an employee ownership trust. And it's become, I think it's true to say, the model of choice for employee ownership. The model is now of great interest overseas. For example, people in Australia are interested and beginning to use it. And even within Europe, the European colleagues around Europe are now looking at the UK initiative with EOTs and beginning to think this could be a good way in which they could structure employee ownership within their countries. So why is that? Well, it's a very clear, flexible approach, as I explain in a moment. There are tax incentives, which I'm not saying that you should do all of this for tax reasons, but there are tax benefits for doing it this way. And it's an all-employee approach, so it's a very democratic approach, which has found favour amongst a lot of the employees who work in those companies. Next slide, please. So what is it and how does it work? Well, it's a trust, a legal instrument. Essentially, the employees of the company become beneficiaries of the trust. The relationship between the main company and the trustee who looks after the beneficiaries. Usually the trustee is a limited company in its own right, so that any trustees who serve on that trust are protected under limited liability arrangements under company law. The document, which is prepared by a specialist lawyer, someone like Malcolm Lynch, who we'll be hearing from later on, will prepare a deed which sets out the arrangement between the company, the dental company, and the trust, which, as I've said, will normally be also a company. So in nearly every OT, this trustee, as I've said, is a corporate trustee registered at Company House. Its sole purpose is to look after the interests of employees, and the individual directors of that trustees are obliged to ensure that that happens. So this new company that's set up is independent of the main company, but it's linked to it through this agreement, which is called a trust deed. Next slide, please. So how would it actually work in practice if you were trying to sell your company? An EOT is, I keep using the word EOT as shorthand for Employee Ownership Trust. EOT is set up to acquire the company from the current owners for the benefit of the employees. That company can then acquire shares from the owners. It can acquire all of the share capital, or it can acquire a majority of the share capital, or it could actually acquire a minority of shares in the company, and with the view perhaps that in the longer term the trust will buy or acquire more shares. The trading company can gift money under inheritance tax arrangements from profits or reserve to this EOT, which can then use that money to buy the owner's shares. Or alternatively, the trust itself can take a loan to finance that purchase, just as it would if it was buying another company. So in that situation, I'm glad to report that lenders such as the Bank of Wales are now quite active in lending to employee ownership trusts, and this is helping to promote the development of the of employee ownership in Wales. The OT then buys the shares as it would through a share sale and purchase agreement. Usually there are arrangements for some of the money that involved in the purchase price to be paid under deferred terms. So in other words, money is paid out of money in the future, which the company will then earn as profit and then gift to the trust so it can pay for those shares. Next slide, please, Emily. So what are the benefits of all of this approach? Well, basically, it's a business as usual model. There's no other parties involved. It involves minimum disruption to trading, unlike some things, some of the other mechanisms, such as management buyouts. It's relatively straightforward to operate. The company is still run by its board, so there's no change there. But certain decisions, such as the sale of a company, the eventual sale of the company, are reserved to the EOT trustee on behalf of the employees. So the employees will then have a major say in the future sale of the company. A benefit is that it ensures that the company will always exist for the benefit of the employees. So part of the thinking of this is that the company will be employed by its employees at all stages in the future, unless the company as a whole was sold. Usually there are new means introduced into the company for communication, to improve communication. Some larger companies have a body called an employee council, which can then be used by the board of directors of the dental company to get views from the employees as to how the company should be operating. Most of the small companies we work for don't use employee councils. They usually opt for a small informal committee, which then relays information to and from the board, from the employees. There are tax benefits. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And the EOT purchase can be done alongside direct shareholding, as I said earlier on, and that can include various things such as option schemes. So you can have a share option scheme, such as executive management incentives, which are quite popular to incentivize managers. You can have that running alongside ownership by the EOT. Next slide, please, Emily. HMRC takes a strong interest in trust arrangements, and employee ownership trusts have to be registered with HMRC. The sale of a company to an employee ownership trust may require prior agreement clearance from HMRC, or it may not. We would always advise that clearance be obtained, and we've never seen it refused. The trust needs to meet certain, and the trustees of the trust need to meet certain requirements going forward if the majority of the shares are owned by the EOT. So, for example, they must ensure that all employees are allowed to participate. So you can't say, well, we don't want Joe Bloggs to be a beneficiary of the trust. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. You have to have all of the employees as members of the trust, beneficiaries of the trust. There's an equality requirement, so all employees have to be treated equally. So the trustees, for example, couldn't give loans to particular employees if the employee suddenly came to them and said we would like a loan. So all of the employees have to be treated equally. There is also a participation requirement. A participator is someone in a share company who owns 5% or more of the share capital. So there are various strictures which limit the number of participators in the company in relation to the total number of employees. And there's a market value condition that, because there is a tax advantage, which I'll explain in a moment, to doing this, the price has to be done at or thereabouts market value or less. It cannot exceed the market value from an independent valuer. Next slide, please, Ebony. So what are the prime tax advantages? Well, if the requirements are met, the ones I've just mentioned, and usually they can be easily met, then the transaction is exempt, fully exempt from capital gains tax. In normal circumstances at the present time, if you were to sell your shares in a company and you've owned those shares for more than a number of years, and it's a trading company, in other words, not an investment or a property company, but a normal business trading company, then you would pay 10% capital gains tax under the arrangements of business assets disposal relief. Under these arrangements, you would not pay any capital gains tax at all, provided you were using employee ownership trust and the employee ownership trust was acquiring the majority of the shares and the controlling interest in the company. So if the EOT has a controlling interest, the company can also pay a bonus, or a bonus or a profit share to employees under an employee profit sharing scheme. So this would allow employees to enjoy an additional tax-free amount of £3,600, which is another incentive for employees. So I've made these comments about tax, but there has to be a bit of a warning on this, because the UK government is currently looking at with HMRC at capital gains tax. If you've met certain requirements, then owners have always been able to treat their gains as capital and pay less tax than if it was treated as income. The government are looking at whether that's correct, whether there should be some harmonisation between income tax and capital gains tax, with capital gains being to look more like income tax. Now, we don't really know what's going to happen there. We were expecting there might be something in the budget. Didn't appear in the event. Our advisors who are close to UK government are telling us that it's unlikely that the employee ownership reliefs that I've just explained to you will go in any near future. They were only introduced in 2014. But the fact remains that we need to keep a close eye on what's happening to capital gains tax in the future. Next slide, please, Emily. An employee-owned business which is owned and controlled by a trust operates just like any other business. So you would have a board of directors who set the company goals and directs the management team. The management team would be usually responsible for commercial success and would report to the board of directors. The trust and the trustees associated with that are looking more at the long-term interests of beneficiaries, and in general are only concerned with the interests of the beneficiaries. So, but one thing they can do is they can appoint the board of directors. So it's quite an important role, the role of trustee in an employee-owned company. But at the same time, most of the decisions of the company are made by the board of directors. One important decision which would be left to the corporate trustee as shareholder would be the decision about selling the company. and it would need to consult the employees, depending on how the deed is written, and there are some flexibility in this, but usually there's a specified figure of yes votes that have to be met in any in a secret ballot to decide whether the company is sold. But the employees do have control over that, which is something that they don't normally have in their company. Next slide, please. So I think that's enough from me. I want to pass on now to next slide, please, Emily. To Mick Allen. We're very fortunate to have been working with Mick for a number of years now. He was the founder, one of the founders of Gateway Dentists in Abergavenny here in Wales, and he's now operating in another company called Smile Dental down in Cornwall, and Mick has also served and as a senior advisor to the Welsh NHS in the past. So very experienced Mick. It's been good to have him as a client, and we always enjoy meeting with him. He always has interesting things to say. So if I can just pass you on now to Mick, and Mick can tell us a little bit about why he decided to do this. Mick.
Thank you, Paul, for those kind words as well. I thought perhaps I'll just give you a quick sort of thumbnail of the journey that I've been on as a dental practice owner, to give you an idea of how I ended up becoming involved with the Wales Cooperative Centre, and to give you an idea of why I'm so keen with the idea of employee ownership in the delivery of dental services. So I'll take you right back to around about 2006, when for those dental colleagues who are on the call now, the UDA contract arrived with a thump on everybody's desks. I was in negotiations with Monmouthshire Local Health Board, as they were at that time, about setting up a practice in Abergavenny. I had a practice in Cardiff at the time, which I had bought from somebody else. And when you inherit a practice like that, or buy a practice like that, sometimes you inherit some things that are difficult to change. So I was interested in establishing a practice of my own that was basically designed to deliver the types of dental care that I was most interested in, particularly special care dentistry, conscious sedation, prison dentistry, and things like that. So I was in negotiation with Monmouthshire Health Board and tendering for a contract for a new practice in Abergavenny. And because I worked out the figures and the time that it would all take to run two practices, I decided that I would sell the Cardiff practice as I set up the Abergavenny practice. And so I made the choice to put the practice on the market, and was approached by a corporate dental company. And the process of selling the practice to the dental corporate company, I have to say, was quite stressful. It was not an easy journey. Right to the point that at literally the 11th hour, I think 12 hours before we were due to sign the documents, there was a bit of argy-bargy from the company that was buying the practice, and I was very lucky to have a solicitor who said, well, we'll just sit tight and I'm sure they'll blink first, which is actually what happened. So, but what happened as I sold that practice was that at the end of the day, the working day on a Friday, the new owner walked in and he said, can I have the keys, please? Goodbye. And it was as simple as that. And I reflected on that over the years, and that was a very uncomfortable experience for me. I'd worked very closely with a lot of the team, and I sort of felt that I had rather let them down in many ways. Then what happened was that I established the Abergavenny practice, Gateway Dental Practice as it then was, and I got to a point where my career was going in an opposite direction to general dental services. I was at that point in my career where, having spent 30 years or so at the coalface delivering dental care, I was sort of interested in other things, and particularly dental public health and delivery of services and planning services and strategy, and also developing my interest in special care dentistry. So I was appointed as a specialist in special care dentistry for Aneurin and Bevan Health Board in the community dental services there. And also as an advisor to Cardiff and Vale Health Board, and then subsequently doing some work with Welsh Government. So I was in a mind where I knew that I couldn't actually spend the time that was needed on running a dental practice. I'm sure those of my colleagues who are on the call now will understand, will appreciate how much time actually running a practice takes, particularly if you are a sort of sole owner. So I was the sole shareholder of a limited company that owned the practice. So, as often happens with these things, I met a mate of mine in the pub who had a very good business brain. He wasn't a dentist. He was someone who was very involved in other types of businesses and also had a very keen interest in social enterprise. And I was just having a pint with him and saying, you know, this is the situation I'm in, and you know, I can either, you know, sell to a younger dentist, but I don't really want to do that because I think the banks can be a quite difficult people to deal with for a young dentist. And I'd had some experience of that with people coming, younger dentists coming to me for advice over time because they're having some pressure from banks. Or I could sell to a corporate, and I had been down that route already, and it wasn't a very comfortable one, and it didn't fit with me at the time. And I was sort of umming and ahhing, thinking, and I said, you know, what do you think I should do? And he said, well, have you ever heard of an organisation called the Wales Cooperative Centre? And I said, who? Anyway, to cut a long story short, I got in touch with Sarah, and I had a long telephone conversation with Sarah, and it was very exciting. And then Sarah and I had a meeting, and Sarah outlined the options that were available to me. And at this point, I hadn't discussed anything with the practice team. And then Sarah had, like I say, outlined what options were available, and we talked about employee ownership trusts and the sort of creating a mini John Lewis, really. And at that point, I thought, okay, this is something that I'm really very interested in. So I then sort of had a chat with the team at the practice, and I'm sure those of you who are on the call who are practice owners, you know, you work with the team and you work really closely. You know, we as dentists, you know, we come in and we do the fiddly bits, but actually what makes a dental practice operate are all the other people, the dental nurses and the receptionists and the therapists and the hygienists. And the practice in Gateway, we had set up within the UDA contract, so we'd got involved quite heavily in skill mix. And I'm again, those of you who are in the dental side of things will understand that skill mix, so that the utilisation of enhanced skills, dental nurses and dental therapists and hygienists is the future of delivery of dental care in general dental services, whether that's privately or through the NHS. You know, the practice, the model of the future practice will be the dentist as leader, and then a lot of other people underneath that individual, or a couple of those individuals, carrying out some of the less complex work and the very complex stuff being done by dentists. So I had a chat with the practice team and said, you know, this is what I'm thinking of. What do you think? And to cut a very long story short, we then went down the process of having some meetings with the Wales Cooperative Centre, and I also had meetings with Malcolm Lynch. And I have to say that making the comparison between how the transition of Gateway dental practice from sole ownership by myself into an employee ownership trust was supported faultlessly, I have to say, and I'm going to embarrass Paul and Malcolm, you know, and Sarah. Their support was so fantastic. It really was, and it was the degree of probity and confidentiality, because I'm sure some of you will be worried about that, as Sarah talked about earlier, people going on fishing expeditions and things, looking at your business. As dentists, we find that quite uncomfortable. You know, the degree of support was fantastic, and I know that they were also very supportive of the practice team and have continued to be very supportive of the practice team. And so we then went down the process of forming an employee ownership. My one question at the start was, is this allowable through the Dentists Act? Because the Dentist Act is a statutory organ that basically describes how ownership of dental practices can take place. So I talked to Malcolm about this. I also talked to the British Dental Association and asked for their legal advice, and I also had to talk to the local health board, who were the people who held the contract, well, not held the contract, we held the contract and were given that by the health board to run. So Malcolm came back within about 48 hours and answered saying, yes, I've looked at the Dental Act, it's absolutely fantastic, you can do it. The BDA took about 2 months to come back with an answer, and then the health board, the NHS, anybody who's had any work done by NHS legal services know it takes quite a long time, and it took them about 6 months to come back. So we now know we've established this. I also talked to the actual Chief Dental Officer for Wales at the time as well, and he agreed that it was possible too. So we know that it can work within the Dentists Act. And we then went through the legal processes and transformed the practice into what is now an employee-owned enterprise. And I'm 100% convinced that the team that now run the practice are doing it much better than I ever did. And I think they're having a very enjoyable time doing it. But for me, I think the key parts were that I wanted to create something that for me sat well with my own conscience, and also I wanted to create something which was affordable and sustainable and resilient. And I think that the way that it has turned out that's proved to be the case. I really think it's very important as a practice owner. You know, we get very close to our teams. We work very closely with them. We probably see them much more than we see members of our own families. And you know, to walk away from a business and leave it in the hands of the people who have helped create it, for me, was a very, very good feeling. And I'd be very interested now to hear what George's comments would be around that. And I'm also very happy to take questions, whether it's within this forum or if you want to, if you're a dentist and you've got questions about this and you want to ask my advice, then you can get in contact with Wales Cooperative Centre, and they can always get in contact with me. I'm very happy to answer any questions. I really do believe that this is a very exciting way of owning practices, moving practices on, even staying as a dentist within a practice, but actually translating some of the burden of running a dental practice with the rest of your team. You know, it's a quid pro quo. You hand ownership over to the team because that's relieving you the burden, but also you have to put some of the control in their hands as well. And that's sometimes not an easy thing to do. So George, let's hear from you.
Hello everyone, cheers Mick. So yeah, we now run the practice, so I'll just talk you through things from our point of view, and same as Mick, I'm happy to talk to anyone outside of this. And yeah, I guess most of you are practice owners, so yeah, confidentiality and things like that are important. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anyone. We've had a few people all over the UK who've been interested and got in touch with me already, and I spoke to an Australian lady on the weekend as well who was interested in our model. So I think it's becoming more mainstream and more interesting. And so yeah, our story was 2015. Mick invited me for a pint, which seems his modus operandi. And then in 2016, I moved to the job with a view of transitioning to the cooperative model. This appealed to me personally, and I don't think if it wasn't happening, I probably would have stayed in my existing job. That was the drawing factor that brought me to Gateway. And yeah, as Mick said, we had loads of support from Paul, Sarah and Malcolm, and yeah, very grateful to them. And we still get that support, which is invaluable. So thank you very much to them. So we're set up in the trust model, as Paul's talked about, with the employee-owned trust, and they own all the shares. So that seemed a good fit for us. No one had to spend any money. Doesn't get complicated if people arrive or leave. It seemed to suit us well. But yeah, there's a variety of models that Paul knows better than us. And then we pay that monthly amount back to Mick. From a transition point of view, I think it was difficult, but I think that's difficult because you're taking over a business, not specifically because it was employee owned. It was just, things that as an associate I hadn't even considered needed doing, took up quite a lot of my time, which, I'm sure practice owners, you know what I'm talking about. But I was very pleased that I didn't have a bank breathing down my neck or personal financial pressures. I did feel a burden not to mess up what Mick had set up, but that wasn't keeping me awake at night thinking of losing my house, which I can imagine is very stressful. We plenty of support from Paul, and we had the trustee that Mick met in the pub. He joined us as a trustee. Kim, he was brilliant. He's a businessman and gave us that business acumen that we all lacked. We were all dentists, nurses, therapists. We're not very businessy minded, and so he gave us that support and asked us questions, and I think that was a very useful person to have. And BDA expert membership was useful as well. All their templates gave us plenty of advice as well. and Employee Ownership Wales put us in touch with a legal company in Cardiff that drew up all our contracts and policies, and that was provided free of charge as well, which was very kind. Thank you. But yeah, I think most of these problems are just becoming a principal problems. I think they're made easier by the business model, not more difficult. And if you are thinking of that sort of transition into maybe staying on, if you've got that principal experience and are able to pass that on, that I think that would be very helpful. And Mick, even though he wasn't working here, was very helpful, always on the end of the phone to help us when we were setting up. But I suppose the more interesting things are the cooperative specific challenges. When we were transitioning, I think quite a lot of the staff didn't really understand what a cooperative model was. That took a bit of explaining, but again, Paul and Sarah did a little presentation for us that sort of got our heads around it and got that conversation started. And then, yeah, we were let loose. And so for the first year, made a few mistakes. We didn't really keep on top of UDAs very well. I imagined it was a bit utopian that if we did dentistry and worked hard, eventually things would sort themselves out. But yeah, we should have kept more of an eye on the UDAs. Wasn't the reality with letting us get away with it. Mick picked a good team of us, which I think was really key to our success as well. So there's a wide range of job roles represented. So we've got 5 of us as directors, 2 nurses, a therapist, and 2 dentists. And then we did the day-to-day running of the practice. But as part of the trust, we had 3 trustees. So we had me, a therapist, who was our employee representative, and Kim, who's that businessman that Mick is a friend of. Having those different views of the practice, I think, is a really helpful part of running the business and part of what being a cooperative is all about. Me trying to tell a receptionist how to do something is, I don't have a clue what receptionists do. They crack on and sort it out. So I'm quite happy to let people who work on reception tell me how it should be run and tell them how it should be run. So after a fairly hectic adjustment period and getting our heads around things, everything's settled down pretty smoothly now. We're ticking along, making a decent profit, and all the initial hurdles have been overcome, and it's just the day-to-day running of the business, which gets tricky sometimes, but it's same as anything. I think the benefits of the cooperative system make everything a bit easier. Employee management, I think that's the thing I find most difficult. But if you're all pulling in the same direction, working for each other and for yourself as well, ultimately, I think that makes us a bit more flexible and makes management a bit simpler. Some patients are aware of our model and seem to support it. It's quite a nice talking point with some patients. We're NHS, so we're not desperate for patients, but I think if you're a private practice, that could be a drawing factor. I think if I was a patient, I'd be interested in joining a practice with that sort of selling point. And I don't think it's a perfect ownership model for everything, for everyone. I'm sure if there's a terribly run business, making it employee owned isn't going to fix all your problems, but I like it. I think it nudges you in an ethical and effective direction. And it works well for us. And then the bonus scheme that Paul was talking about, that's obviously a nice added on as well. So there's lots of different ways of doing it, but the way we do it is we figure out how much we want to give as a bonus. And then based on people's salaries, we divvy it up that way. So if you earn more in the year, you get a larger percentage of the share. With our thought behind that, that if you're being paid more, it's probably because you're doing more and you're a more effective member of the team. So I think we benefit from using the cooperative model. Increased staff retention, we don't have a huge turnover. We've got a nice team, we enjoy working together. I think it's a nice place to work as well. everyone should be pulling together as well. And the ultimate motivation of treating patients and working together to achieve that, I think, is more successful than if we've got a big head office thinking about profits. And although we make a profit and we want to make a profit, that's not a huge driving factor for us. We're able to put other things ahead of that. And on that note, there's less financial pressure for us personally. If it all goes terribly wrong, I can walk away and go and get an associate job somewhere else, and Mick can pick up the pieces somehow. Thanks for that. But yeah, I don't think this will happen, but I'm not, yeah, like I said earlier, I'm not being kept awake at night with financial pressures, which is very nice. On the flip side, I'll have nothing to sell at the end of it, but that's fair enough, I think. I think associates enjoy the model as well. We've recruited an associate who was working for a corporate, and he enjoys this working environment more. He feels more like he's an integral part of the team. And if he has any issues, he can come and talk to me. Come now if you want it. It's quite a simple, close-knit community in our practice. So I think everyone feels a bit more valued, and they also know they have that opportunity to develop into a director as well. They can have that taste of practice ownership if they wanted to, and also have more control of their own destiny. If they think something's a terrible idea, they can let me know why and explain it, and vice versa. Having everyone represented on the directors, I think, is a really good idea, and that would be something I'd encourage other practices to do. And it's a supportive model as well. I imagine being the sole principal can be isolating at times. There's lots of problems that can crop up, but having the support of another practice principal and 3 other directors is invaluable. I really cherish that. It's a rewarding way of working, and I enjoy working in this environment more than I think I would another. There are drawbacks, so I'll go through those, but I think they can be navigated. Having 5 directors, having those 5 viewpoints, I think is a really good thing, but that can slow things down a bit. Finding a balance between me deciding there and then on something, or taking it back to the other directors and discussing it and then figuring it out, I think that can seem a bit dithery, and that could be perceived as a lack of leadership. I've made some decisions on my own that I think the other directors wish I had consulted them about, but vice versa. If I want to buy a printer for the practice, I don't need to go and ask everyone as well. So it's trying to find that balance of doing things yourself, but also considering other people might have a different viewpoint. And I think we're a bit more reactive than proactive in management sometimes, which, that could be something, but I think that's more of a personality traits with us, really. We're quite laid back, and we're not, I think we could be a bit more proactive, but I think that's our problem more than a cooperative problem. Another problem could be balancing stability of the directors with freshness. I think, sorry, I've just seen a chat. Stock levels have reduced and all that. I'll answer that. I don't really understand that question, sorry. Do you want to type it again? I'll carry on, and then. So do you mean how do we work our monthly profit out?
Happy for somebody to put their mic on if they want to, just to explain the question.
Well, stick your mic on, that's probably easier. I'm not sure when that message came, sorry, I've been ranting on without looking.
If you want, I can take these questions at the end, George.
Yeah.
I'll find out a little bit more about what Tracy wants to know there, and I'll bring it up at the end.
Thank you very much. So yeah, balancing stability with freshness. We've got 5 directors who all enjoy working here, and we're a fairly young team, so we could stay here for another 20 years. And I think that could be a bit negative for the other people in the team who really developed, and they could run the practice equally well as well. So trying to mix things up, but also keep things stable is something that I think we're going to have to consider soon, because we've all been at it for 5 years now. I'm not planning on going anywhere, but yeah, I don't want to stay on as a director if there are other people who could bring something else to it as well. So trying to mix that team up, that's something that could be difficult. And then there's some people who aren't massively interested in this sort of ownership model, and they just want to turn up to work and do their job and go home, which I think is fine. It's yes, I think they're the sort of staff members that don't give you a huge amount of hassle, and they're good, but you have to have some people who've got a bit of passion for the practice and for perhaps the model as well to become good directors and help have that team. And making sure you have a good team in place already, I think, would be very useful. I did put as a negative that getting finance could be tricky, but Paul seems to have his contacts in the Bank of Wales, so he'll sort you out. So I think generally a good test of whether it's a good idea would do it again. I think the only way I'd leave Gateway would be to do something similar elsewhere. I enjoy it. I think it's a nice practice, and I think the staff enjoy it as well. And yeah, if we were sold to a corporate, there's lots of our staff members who used to work for corporates who hated it, and yeah, I'm sure they would have left, and the practice wouldn't have done so well. So yeah, what I'd do again, I'd try and keep on top of the targets. I'd have a bit more appreciation for how difficult being a principal is. It's not something that can be done in between checkups. It's got to have a bit of time set aside for it, which I didn't hugely appreciate at the time. And having set roles for directors early so that everyone knows who's in charge of what and which staff members can come to which director for which thing. I think that would have been helpful. But yeah, that's a brief history really of what we're doing and how we're going, but it's all ticking along nicely as the basics. But yeah, I'm very happy to chat through this and be contacted directly as well if anyone wants. So yeah, I'll pass you on to Malcolm, who was our very helpful lawyer. Cheers, Malcolm.
Bore da, good morning. My name's Malcolm Lynch, and I'm a partner at Wrigley's Solicitors, and I've been working with the Wales Cooperative Centre on employee ownership for at least 25 years. In a brief time available, I'd like to mention a special requirement about dental practice succession, a provision to watch out for if the practice has a national health contract, the legal requirements for an EOT, and some common questions about the EOT succession route. So my first point is maintaining the requirements of a dental corporation. When a dental practice becomes a company or dental corporation in the terms of the Dentist Act, there's a requirement that at least half of the directors of the dental company are dentists or dental care professionals registered with the General Dental Council, and then either suspended nor erased from the register. Mick Allen was the sole dentist director in his company. Before succession and after succession, there were 2 dentists and 3 other dental professionals. Under the EOT, it's necessary to ensure that this requirement is still observed, that at least half of the directors of the dental company are dental professionals. So we build this into the Articles of Association of the dental company as a reminder of what is required. After succession, the dental company might, for example, have a non-dental professional practice manager alongside dental professionals. My second point relates to the change of control provisions in NHS contracts. A standard NHS contract is likely to have a change of control provision, which will come into effect if the dental practice is a partnership or sole trader and wishes to incorporate. At that point in time, a change of control provision will be likely to be put into the contract. It can also occur when there's a revised contract, if the dental practice has changed from the partnership or sole trader into a limited company. So what might a change of control provision include? Well, if it's a private limited company, that there is a change in more than 10% control or ownership of the voting share capital. Secondly, it might be a change in 10% of the voting on matters at general meetings, or in a change in the right to appoint and remove directors, holding majority of voting rights at a meeting of directors. So do check to see if the NHS contract has got these provisions and what is the level of detail to be observed. It may be the requirement is simply to fulfill the requirements of a dental corporation, and if so, then the move to an EOT is not significant, since it's simply a matter of satisfying the requirements of half the directors of the dental company being dental professionals. However, if there is a change of control provision, then consent from the NHS should be sought before the change. And there is a procedure for obtaining consent, but it's worth making informal inquiries before submitting a formal submission and triggering a timed response. The NHS policy guidance on change of control provisions is directed towards a novation of contracts. In other words, where the business of the dental company is sold, rather than where shares in the company are sold. The NHS appears to have more limited powers to refuse consent where there's a change of control within an existing dental company. So my third point is to look again at the legal requirements for the EOT, which has been touched on by Paul Cantrell. There are 5 requirements which an EOT must satisfy and continue to satisfy. And the 5 requirements are headings for more detailed provisions, so I'll only mention the more significant of the detailed provisions. The trading requirement. A requirement that the company is not carrying on a substantial non-trading activity is an important trading requirement. So, for example, property development. If you have bought a number of properties within the dental practice company, then it may be that that is a more significant asset than the trading activity. If it was, then that would need to be separated out before the EOT took over the dental practice. The second one is the all-employee benefit requirement. And this means that the assets of the trust can only be applied for the benefit of all eligible employees, including directors, on the same terms. In a lot of dental practices, there are self-employed dentists. If the self-employed dentist is an officer of the dental company, that is a director, then they count as an eligible employee. A person who holds 5% or more of the ordinary shares of the company cannot benefit from the assets of the trust or from the bonus scheme. So if you want to incentivize anyone through shares, please keep this in mind. The equality requirement. Employees who participate in the bonus scheme must do so on the same terms, which can be based on remuneration, length of service, or hours worked. Or it can be a mixture of all 3, but in which case each of those is in itself an independent part of that for which the equality requirement must be maintained. And what is important is that eligible employees cannot be excluded from the scheme, and it can't be designed to give the highest return to the highest paid to the exclusion of others. There's 2 more requirements. Controlling interest requirement is that the EOT must hold more than 50% of the ordinary share capital and have majority control of the company on all questions affecting the company as a whole. And these provisions cannot be changed without the consent of the EOT. It's important when drafting provisions in the Articles of Association of a dental company that these requirements are adhered to in order to avoid clawback of the capital gains tax, not from the owner, but from the EOT following the transition. The fifth requirement is what's called limited participation. And in some extent, it answers the question, how small should the company be before it can have or what's the minimum number of employees in the company before it can satisfy the requirements of being an EOT. And the limited participation requirement sets out a rather complex formula relating to the number of employees there are in the company as against the shareholders who still hold shares in that company after the transition. So if you're getting down to something like 6 or 7 employees of the company, it's getting rather too small for an EOT at that point in time. And this limited participation point occurs if some of the owners of the business are still retaining shares in that business once it goes into employee ownership. Let's just deal with some common questions to finish up. If an owner sells 51%, then how much are they taxed on the subsequent sale? Well, they'll still be eligible for entrepreneurs' relief if they hold 5% or more of the voting shares on the subsequent sale of shares. So that's a 10% capital gains tax if they're still holding 5% or more. Is there a need for a tax clearance? Well, it's usual to get a tax clearance before the transition to ensure that the deferred consideration, that is, money is paid to the owners over a number of years, is not considered as an income payable to the retiring owner, but is actually a capital payment. What sort of percentage should the EOT hold in the company? Well, really, this is a matter for decision between the owners and the employees of the company on day one, but there may be a long-term goal in there as well. So some companies go for the John Lewis partnership model in the long term, and others are quite happy to have some employees holding shares in the business, taking account of the 5% limits which I referenced. And maybe that starts to be the case at the beginning. So you have employees buying some shares at the same time, but over time, the John Lewis partnership model might be the one which everyone is happy to have in the end. So what is the holding company? Well, the EOT is a trust which has a company as its trustee, and the company is the legal owner of the shares which it is purchasing from the retiring owner. But the benefit is held for the employees under the EOT. So the EOT is therefore sometimes described as a holding company. So to distinguish the directors from the dental company from the directors of the EOT company, we call the EOT company directors trustee directors, and they play the role of being the long-term shareholders of the company. Another question is, what would happen if the EOT sells the company at some time in the future? Capital gains tax on the sale would be payable on the gain between the value at which the company was established originally by its owners, before the EOT was established, and the value on the sale. So effectively, the EOT's tax bill captures the tax bill of the retiring owner and any gains since the EOT purchase. So if you're selling the company, how do owners then protect themselves that they'll have obtained payment for their shares if they're paid, say, half the money's on completion or a third of the money's on completion, and then the rest over 6 or 7 or 8 years? The first thing to do is ensure that there are good people to carry on the dental business when the retiring owner ceases their involvement as a dentist. The EOT is a way of sharing ownership and sharing responsibility more broadly. So it's important before completing the sale of the business to ensure that you have the right leadership succession in place, and employees understand about what to expect from being an employee-owned company, their responsibilities and rights. I mean, finally, as lawyers, we can put in some protections, such as obtaining a guarantee from the dental company, and some protective rights for the owner in the sale and purchase agreement or articles of association until the owner is closer to being paid in full. But being mindful of that requirement, which I mentioned earlier, that the EOT has to have a control on all the important matters in the company. The owner's role, therefore, might change over time from business owner and director of the dental company to director of the dental company and part owner to trustee director of the EOT. Many dental practices are husband and wife partnerships within a limited company. Sometimes one of them may wish to retire earlier than the other, and so shares of the one are sold to the EOT, plus sufficient shares of the other to make it 51%, or such larger figure which is affordable for the EOT, and the second owner carries on for longer within the EOT structure. My final question to answer is, if I sell 51% of the business, should I expect to get a dividend on the remaining shares until the rest of my shares are purchased? This is a question for you to agree with the employee owners. And employee owners with a 51% control could say that actually we're not going to pay any dividends in future. And so you may wish to consider how fair that will be if employees are receiving a bonus, but you cannot get a dividend. That's a question for discussion and debate, and depends quite largely, I think, on the percentage of shares which are originally sold by the dental business owner to the EOT. I think I'll leave it there for other questions which will come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's very useful. Ebony, could we just pass on to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. And the next one, please. Thank you very much. So I'm just mindful of time because I want to, allow enough time for people to ask questions if they have any. So just quickly want to cover, the kind of support that we can offer you as potential clients if you're looking to, go on the journey of transitioning into employee ownership. As Sarah alluded to at the beginning, the support that we offer is fully subsidised by Welsh Government and the European Union. I would, I suppose highlight that the only support that we don't cover the financial cost of is the legal advice. Okay, so just to give you, a general idea, that when we start working with you, if you were to contact us, then we would begin by finding out a little bit more about your personal plans as the exiting owner, or whether you're planning to remain in the business, but you want to sort of go, transition into an employee-owned business. So we would find out more about your personal objectives and give you an idea of the options that are available to you in greater detail. We then commission an independent valuation for the business, and we usually find during that valuation process, it's a good opportunity to find out exactly where the business is at, what might need to be tidied up before any transition to an employee-owned scenario can be undertaken successfully. And at that point, we may also bring in specialist tax advisors to give you advice on particular issues that may be flagged up during that valuation process. Once we've done the valuation, we then work with you as the owners and possibly, the management team or the wider employee team to work on a business plan and your financial plan, at which point we then introduce you also to lenders, if needed, that will be able to help you to finance the transaction. Paul's mentioned earlier the Development Bank of Wales, but there are also other lenders that we can put you in contact with and facilitate those discussions. And then I think, George made a number of valid points really in terms of some of the challenges that they faced as employees being new to the concept of being business owners. And I think we'd like to sort of reiterate really that we are keen for clients to remain in contact with us so that we can support them through that process, because I think, the actual signing and completion of the paperwork is one key milestone, but then we like to continue working with our clients to ensure that the employee team are comfortable in the role moving forward. And to that extent, we provide training on the legal duties of company directors and trustees. We can also support with further business planning. So if employees are finding it difficult to maybe get their head around the financial aspect of the business, then we can provide training around that as well and help with financial planning. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview there. There is more information on our website, Employee Ownership Wales, and you'll find our contact details there. So what I would say is if you would like to have an exploratory chat, please don't hesitate to contact us. So I'll hand you back over to Ebony now, who I believe may have some questions that have been raised in the chat section. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, everybody.
Diolch, Branwen. I hope we've got time just for a couple of questions that have come through. Question for Mick. What was the lead-in time for you from thinking about this exit route to completing the sale? And a question for the EO team. When should other owners start this process, and when should they actually contact yourselves?
Okay. I think probably the lead-in time was about, well, the thing that took us most time was waiting for legal advice to come back from NHS, the NHS Legal Services, because we had to get their say-so before we could progress. But we've already established now, sorry, just turn my video on. We've now established that principle anyway, so that would be less time for other people. I guess about 18 months, I suppose, altogether, but 6 months of that was waiting for the NHS Legal Services to come back. Perhaps it was even less than 18 months, to be honest. I'm not quite sure.
No, thanks,
I could check the emails and tell you when the emails started and when we handed it over. A year to 18 months, but 6 months of that was waiting for NHS Legal Services to come back. The rest of it was like any sale. It probably takes 6 months anyway, by the time you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, but I think that it's, I mean, my approach to it was that I was moving on to a different career. I think that if you wanted to, say you were someone, who just wanted to have co-ownership of the business and help running the business, and to, instead of going to outside organizations, there are businesses out there that will help with your running your business and provide you with HR support and IT support and all the rest of it, but that comes at a cost. If you've got people within your own practice who can do those things, but you've never really engaged with them or know how to reward them for doing it, then creating an employee-owned structure, I think, would work well for that as well.
Thanks, Nick. Mick, before you go, a question just popped up. Any regrets?
From my perspective, no. I think one of the things I forgot to say really was that I wanted to create something with the practice team that rewarded the people who had helped build the practice. And George has described very well some of the challenges that came about from that for the practice team, and probably. Have I got any regrets about that? No, I don't think so. I think they've been very well supported by the Wales Cooperative Centre, and as George said, I've sort of been able to answer questions on the phone. I think if you're not used to running a dental practice, it can be quite a challenge. But I don't personally have any regrets. The other thing I forgot to describe, and I'll be very honest, was how we set up the financing of it all. So we agreed a value for the business. That the Welsh Cooperative Centre provided us with an independent valuer, and we wanted to agree a price that was affordable and sustainable. The valuation that came back I thought was a bit too high, so I asked them to lower it a bit, which I think the valuer found slightly surprising. But anyway, I wanted to make it so I was confident in my mind that everything would be sustainable. and we agreed that valuation, and now the business pays me back over 10 years. So well, they've been paying me back for 5 years now. So in another 5 years, I will no longer have any interest in that business. I have one preference share, which means that if George and the team wanted to dispose of the business elsewhere, they would have to come to me to be involved in the conversations about that. So, and once the 10 years are up, that preference share disappears. I think Malcolm would describe how it disappears. I think kind of puff of smoke or something, it goes away. So that's how we structured it. Whether that would work for everybody, I don't know. So none of the employees had to go to the bank and acquire money or take out a mortgage to do this. I became the bank effectively. And for those dental people out there, we've described a bit of this in an article in BDJ in Practice in, I think, 2019, 2020, something like that. I think it was February 2020 actually. So it's out there in BDJ in Practice.
Oh, thank you, Mick. That's brilliant. In terms of the employee ownership team, have you got any comments on when people should come to you? Should they come to you quite early before they really want to go ahead with this, just to have those initial conversations?
I was going to say, Ebony, it is never too early to talk to us as a team. The earlier the better, I would say. Don't ever leave it until the last minute, because things can go wrong as actually I think this transition, it was very enjoyable because of the people involved within it. But as Mick said, the longest aspect was the NHS getting back to us with regard to the legal matters. But I think Malcolm has, in the chat, has said that we engaged him and with Mick and the team in June 2016, and this completed in the November. So it was that's quite a short space of time, to be honest. So I would say 12 to 18 months is about right for the transaction to happen. I mean, if it's needed to happen before then, fine, we can work to deadlines, whatever they are. But yeah, the earlier the better, I would say. We always say 5 years is a good timeline to start thinking before you're wanting to exit. But but yeah, the earlier the better. And and we can start the process off slowly if it is longer. But so yes, as soon as people want to talk to us, we are ready to talk to them.
Well, thanks, Sarah. That's brilliant. George, the question that came up in the chat earlier, it was really relating to sort of accountancy software and management accounting protocol for you guys, really.
Yeah.
So give me a little bit more information. For example, if lab work is made, we put the allocated payment through at 4 to 6 weeks from start. So would show at a zero income for appointments for stages of denture, bringing the hourly rate down, but an increase at the fit month. So avoided staff bonuses, incentive plans as too hard to calculate accurately. Yeah. I think this is very much about how do you ensure you get timely and regular and quality financial information to manage this.
So we used to have a bookkeeper that we sent stuff off every month, and then she'd tot it up and then send it off to the accountant at the end of the year. So we had a sort of idea what was going on. But we've moved to QuickBooks now, which is you can see it there and then it links into your bank account. It's very user friendly, and we've done financial planning, which on the NHS I think is probably a bit easier than other businesses, because you get your set amount. But obviously UDA's lab bills sort of throw up and things like that. But we don't work out our bonus until year end, so we pay in October for the April to April before. So we've got plenty of time to work out what our profit was, and also gives us a good idea of how we're getting on that year before committing too much money to spend. And we still make a profit, and we still keep that profit in the business to have a little nest egg for when things go wrong. But yeah, that is a bit difficult though, because then you're getting rewarded for work that you did 18 months ago, which is, yeah, not the instant gratification that some people are after, but that's the way we do it. But I suppose you could do it monthly, but yeah, we'd find it tricky because of, yeah, the things that Tracy's described. It's, yeah, there are things that go up and down.
I think it's worth pointing out as well, as George has mentioned, you have to look after the business first. So, you know, we get a lot of questions. I used to get a lot of questions in that. Now I'm employee owned, does that mean I don't have to turn up for work, and can I have a company car? Well, if that's your kind of thought process, you're never going to make any money, and maybe the business won't be there for very long. So it is about ensuring that the business comes first, that you're looking after, reinvesting that you need to do, and then, you know, you are rewarded for that. So you know, it's checks and balances, isn't it, George?
Yeah.
Okay, just a comment from Mick there about obviously he'd like to add that the Wales Cooperative Centre do not apply any pressure on you to progress. Have the conversation and find out the options would be my advice. Thank you for that, Mick. Another question from Tracy. We have older staff, so if they retire, what happens to their shares?
So no one owes anything. So from our point of view, the way we're set up, but I guess Paul and Malcolm might know different options. But yeah, if someone leaves or quits or joins, you don't have to buy in, and you don't get paid anything when you leave, which is simpler for us anyway. But
yeah, Paul, do you want to clarify how that EOT system works again, just for the benefit of everyone here today?
Yeah,
you want to do that, Malcolm?
There's no individual allocation of shares to employees under the employee ownership trust. The trust is for the benefit of all employees. Nobody has got a set number of shares at all. So it's not a case of the employee saying, these are my shares and I should sell them, not within the employee ownership trust. So it's only if employees have purchased shares directly, or some other scheme is in place where employees own shares personally, that there's a need to think about that.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. Okay, I think that's it for the questions, guys. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope that everybody has found this morning really interesting. I mean, I for one, it's lovely to hear the story again from Mick, and then how it's kind of progressed with George. So so without further ado, we would like to say thank you for coming today, and please get in touch with us if this is something you think is for your practice and your business. We'd love to hear from you and hopefully help you on that journey to employee ownership as well. So thank you. This is being recorded, as you know, so it is available for download, and that will be sent out to you. So you'll be able to watch this again if there's information that you've missed. But our contact details are on the screen now, and also you will get a copy of the presentation as well. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.